George Foreman became world heavyweight champion, lost millions of dollars, nearly disappeared from relevance, and then somehow came back richer than almost every boxer in history. But here's the strange part. His second fortune didn't come from fighting. It didn't come from becoming stronger, faster, or more dominant in the ring. It came from understanding something far more powerful than boxing. George Foreman discovered that in the modern world, skill alone doesn't make people rich forever. Identity does, trust does, positioning does. And once you understand the hidden business lesson behind his comeback, you start realizing why some people work hard their entire lives and still stay trapped, while others build wealth that keeps growing long after the work itself is over. Welcome to Beyond the Scene, where movies reveal the hidden systems controlling real life. George Foreman's early life was built from anger, poverty, violence, instability. He grew up with the kind of energy that usually destroys people if it isn't redirected somewhere meaningful. Boxing became that direction. It gave him structure, purpose, discipline. And eventually it transformed him into one of the most feared fighters on the planet. George wasn't just winning fights back then, he terrified people. Every punch looked like it could end someone's career instantly. He became heavyweight champion through raw physical dominance, and for a while, it looked like that power would last forever. But then came the collapse. Losses started changing everything. Money disappeared, bad financial decisions piled up. The fame that once made him untouchable slowly faded away. And this is where the movie becomes far more interesting than just another sports comeback story, because George's real transformation didn't happen inside the ring. It happened after his identity shattered. That's the moment most people fear the most in life. The moment the thing you built your entire existence around suddenly stops working. For George, boxing was never just a career. It was who he was. And when that image collapsed, he was forced to become someone completely different. That's the hidden turning point most people miss. George Foreman's second fortune only became possible because he stopped trying to be the same person forever. A lot of people destroy themselves chasing old versions of who they used to be, former athletes trying to relive their prime, business owners refusing to adapt, people clinging to identities that no longer fit the world around them. But George eventually understood something extremely important: reinvention is survival. The people who win long-term are rarely the strongest. They're the ones willing to evolve. When George returned to boxing years later, people laughed at him. He was older, heavier, slower, softer. The terrifying monster from the past was gone, but what replaced him ended up becoming far more valuable. Instead of trying to intimidate people, George became relatable, friendly, warm, funny. He smiled constantly, told stories, made people comfortable around him. And without realizing it, he was slowly building something much bigger than a fighting career. He was building trust. That's the real secret hiding underneath the movie. George Foreman's second fortune came from emotional positioning, not physical dominance. Because in business, how people feel about you matters more than how talented you are. Skill gets attention, trust creates money, and once people trust you, opportunities start multiplying automatically. This becomes obvious when the movie reaches the most important decision of George's life. A kitchen appliance company approaches him with an offer to promote a grill. And honestly, it sounds ridiculous. One of the most dangerous heavyweight champions in history selling cooking machines, most people in his position would reject it instantly because it didn't match the image they wanted to protect. That's another trap people fall into constantly. Ego destroys opportunity. People become so obsessed with looking important that they miss the very thing capable of changing their lives. But George said yes, and that single decision changed everything. Because George understood something most celebrities still don't understand today. People don't buy products because of features, they buy feelings. The George Foreman grill didn't explode in popularity because it was some revolutionary piece of technology. It exploded because people trusted George. He made the product feel simple, safe, relatable. He wasn't selling a machine, he was selling comfort, familiarity, ease. And suddenly millions of people who would never care about a kitchen appliance started buying one because George Foreman made them feel good about it. That's when the real money started flowing. Not fighting money, not one-time paycheck money, system money, leverage money. And this is where the movie quietly reveals one of the most important business lessons you'll ever hear. There are two ways people earn income. The first is through direct effort. You work, you get paid. Stop working, the money stops too. That's how George made money during most of his boxing career. Every paycheck required physical sacrifice. Every dollar demanded more effort, more punishment, more risk. But the grill changed everything because now George had shifted into leverage. Every time somebody bought that grill, he earned money whether he was working or not, whether he was awake or asleep, whether he stepped into a ring again or not. His identity itself had become the asset. And once your identity becomes valuable, income starts scaling beyond your physical limits. That's why George eventually made far more money outside boxing than inside it, because fighting depended on his body, business depended on his positioning, one was temporary, the other was scalable. And honestly, this is the exact shift most people never make in life. They stay trapped selling effort forever, hours for dollars, time for survival, constantly grinding harder without realizing hard work alone has limitations. Time is finite, energy is finite, physical ability is finite, but leverage changes the equation completely. Leverage allows one action to create value repeatedly. One audience becomes millions, one brand becomes an empire. One trusted identity creates opportunities endlessly. That's why the richest people in the modern world rarely make money through labor alone. They build systems, brands, platforms, assets. They position themselves in ways that allow income to continue flowing without requiring constant physical sacrifice. George Foreman accidentally discovered this after losing everything, and maybe that's the most powerful part of his story. Sometimes failure destroys the version of you that would kept you trapped forever. If George stayed undefeated forever, maybe he never evolves. Maybe he stays locked inside the identity of fighter permanently, but losing forced him to rebuild himself from scratch. And during that rebuilding process, he became more valuable than he ever was before. That idea is uncomfortable because most people see failure as proof they're finished. But often failure is just the collapse of an outdated identity. The old version dies so a more adaptable version can survive. George stopped trying to be feared, and ironically, becoming likable made him richer than becoming dominant ever did. That's another hidden truth the movie exposes. In today's world, attention is valuable, but trust is priceless. Anybody can go viral, anybody can get noticed temporarily, but trust creates longevity, trust creates repeat customers, trust creates loyalty. And George became trusted because people sensed authenticity in him. He didn't feel manufactured, he felt human, imperfect, genuine. And that's why his story still matters today far beyond boxing. Because the modern economy increasingly rewards people who can build emotional connection at scale. Whether it's creators, entrepreneurs, influencers, business owners, the people winning long-term are usually the ones who make audiences feel something, not just the ones with technical skill. The movie also quietly exposes another brutal truth about money. Most people chase income without understanding ownership. George earned huge paydays as a fighter, but those paydays disappeared quickly because active income alone rarely creates lasting wealth. His second fortune became different because it was connected to systems and royalties. Ownership scales differently than labor ever can. That's why people can work incredibly hard for decades and still struggle financially, while others build assets that continue generating income for years. The game changes completely once your money stops depending entirely on your physical presence. And maybe that's the real lesson hidden inside the Big George Foreman. Your greatest opportunity often arrives disguised as something beneath your ego. A strange partnership, a small opportunity, a direction that initially feels unrelated to your identity. Most people miss life-changing opportunities because they're too busy protecting an outdated image of themselves. George didn't become richer by protecting his old identity as the terrifying heavyweight champion. He became richer by evolving into someone people trusted enough to invite into their homes every single day. And once you understand that, you realize his story was never really about boxing at all. It was about leverage. It was about reinvention. It was about turning identity into an asset instead of a prison. Because eventually hard work stops being enough. At some point, survival through effort alone reaches its limit, and the people who escape that cycle are usually the ones who learn how to position themselves differently, build trust differently, think differently. George Foreman lost millions of dollars before he discovered that secret. But once he understood it, his second fortune became bigger than the first ever could been. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to Beyond the Scene, because the best movies aren't just stories, they're blueprints hiding in plain sight.